scary stories.
Please don't kill me. I have a lot to live for.
This happened to me 2 to 3 years ago. I was around 23 at the time. I am a female and I live in Romania. One night I was coming home from class at around 11 p.m. I had to take the subway for about 12 stops. The destination I had to get off at was at the end of the line for the subway. At that time, there wouldn't be many people in the subway. I'm a pretty lonely person. All I need is my headset and my music, and I am good to go. Said and done. I plugged in my music. I picked the furthest chair in the subway, away from the only two people that were taking the subway with me at the time. Loser. I seen with the corner of my eye a silhouette approaching me and sitting right next to me. It was a man, fairly built, dark hair, wearing glasses, a black shirt, with a black hoodie, and snickering smile. He doesn't engage in talking with me. He would just stare at my phone as I would browse through my music. I can hear him breathe heavily. Not like painfully, but still like he was feeling something very strong. I feel uneasy, so I decide to change my seat and go even further behind, trying to avoid him without looking like a freak myself. I pick a new chair, sit down, plug my headset in again, and proceed with the remaining 6 to 12 stops on my way home. I see the silhouette growing bigger and bigger, and a breeze running down my skin as I realize the guy is again sitting right next to me. He was glancing, mid-air, dead eyes, a big smile, staring right into my phone. I panic. There are still 4 stops to go. I have nowhere to hide. I look after the other person in the subway, trying to sit next to her, thinking that the strength comes on numbers. She is no longer there. I start shaking a bit, but not allowing the creeper to notice me being vulnerable. I stand up, go to the door, and just decide to stand until my stop comes. This way, he won't sit next to me. Right? Wrong. He comes straight after me, sits on the chair right near the door, and because he could not see my phone from that angle, he fixates me in my soul with his black, dead eyes and says, "Hey, gorgeous, what are you avoiding me for?" I start freaking out as I look at my phone trying to call my boyfriend or message him, and he stops me by saying, "I know no one will help you. You wouldn't send an SOS message by now." I know he did not. That moment, I realize I am cornered. He has been focusing on my phone to see who I was talking to, trying to figure out if I panicked, trying to see if I would ask someone for help. He cornered me. I had the luck to reach my stop, as I would delay any reaction or ignore him so that he would repeat whatever he wanted to say. I get dropped off and run for the exit, not looking back. I get at the surface and I don't see him anymore. At this moment, I put my phone in my purse and realize I had pepper spray with me all along. My heartbeat comes back to normal, as now, at least, I know I have something to defend myself with, but still a long way to go home. And who knows if he is alone or not. I walk rather fast for maybe 5 minutes from the metro and feel a hand grabbing my wrist hard and pulling me back. Another hand covering my mouth, disabling me from screaming my lungs out. It was him, the same black hoodie, dark hair, dead eyes, Stalker. He was furious and said, "Are you running from me, you fucking bitch? How dare you run away from me? You should be honored that I give you my attention." I am fairly built for a woman, so I guess he thought men don't find me beautiful or something, and should feel blessed a creep like him stalks me and tries to hurt me. Now my phone is in my bag. I can't call the police. I can't reach for the pepper spray. I panic. I can't punch him in the dick. I can't scratch him as I don't have long nails. His hand is still on my mouth. What do I do? I did the most desperate and disgusting thing I could think of just to save my life. I played along. I used my other hand to touch the inside of his thigh and mumble, "I'm sorry," while his hand was on my mouth. He took his hand off my mouth and I repeated that I was sorry. I didn't realize he was just flirting. He left his guard down. He took his hand off my wrist. He asked me for my phone number and address to drop me off, but I refused, saying I'd rather add him on Facebook, and he agreed. I told him that I had reached for my phone, but instead picked the pepper spray and got him and sprayed him all over his face. I made sure that I covered both eyes, nose, and mouth, even his ears and hands. He began to suffocate. He turned red from all the pepper spray and started to swell. I called the police, told them what had happened and what I did. They asked me if he is immobilized, and I said yes, as the effect wears off in 45 minutes. The police arrived there, and 5 minutes later, to see me shaking like a leaf and a man on the ground swollen like a pumpkin, throwing up and swearing me between gasps of breath. He was arrested, and the police told me that they have been looking for him for the past week, as they discovered the body of a 24-year-old woman in his apartment, fairly built lady. The woman was his girlfriend, and ever since, he has never gotten back to the apartment. I do not remember what he wanted to do with me.
Let me give some background information. I'm 18 and living in Dagenham. It's a quite busy area, so there is normally a lot of people around. This particular night, me and my friend, I'll call him Jim, were on our way to camp out at the local park. You were never allowed in there past 10 p.m., so we would have to hide from the park police. The park we were staying at was always busy up until about 9 p.m. Then it turns into a ghost field. Anyway, the story we had set out for the park at about 8:30, so by the time we got there, there wouldn't be anyone to grass us up. We arrived, and everything went according to plan. We had the tent, snacks, portable DVD player, Pokemon Go at the ready. It was perfect. 10 p.m. came, and we had the park police shutting down the gates. They're quite loud, so it's always easy to hear the gates creak. Once we were sure the police left, we decided to whip out our phones and play some Pokemon Go. There was a Pokestop in the park, and I had to lure a module to use. We had been playing for about half an hour when we heard a loud bang come from the gate, like someone had run into it. Dagenham is known for its drunks, so we shook it off as nothing. To cut the long story short, we went back to the tent, watched a couple of action films, and went to sleep. Not even an hour into sleep, and I woke up with a horrible sense of dread, like someone was watching me. All my senses were heightened. Something wasn't right. I hear some crunching coming from behind the tent. I thought it must have been a fox, until I heard it, or should I say, them, speak. I managed to make out the words, "They're gonna hear us. Keep your damn mouth shut." I quietly but violently shook Jim to wake him up and told him what I had heard. I needed to make sure I wasn't crazy, so I made him listen. While listening, his face turned white. The fear spread across his face. He grabbed my hand and whispered, "We need to make a run for it. Just trust me." I did not hesitate. We're quite athletic people, so running isn't a problem. We slowly unzipped the tent, and with one big breath, made a mad dash for the gate. We were pounding footsteps and heavy breathing behind us as a guy shouted in a horrible, musky voice, "Oi, slow down! We just want to play with you!" And both the guys started laughing madly. Like, seriously, it was a messed up fucking laugh. We made it to the fence and leapt over it with ease. The rest was just a mad dash to my house, which was only around the corner. We made it back, slammed the door, ran up to my room, and peeked out of the bedroom window. We saw both guys split past my house, both holding something metallic. It was hard to see what it was, since it was pitch black due to the street lamp being out. Go figure. At that moment, I turned to Jim and asked why he looked so terrified back in the tent. He then went on to explain what he had heard the guys say. "You grab the small one, and the large one's mine. The bigger they are, the bigger the challenge." That terrified me. We went back to the tent the next morning and found all of our stuff destroyed. The tent was smashed, portable DVD player was snapped in half, and all of our food was thrown all over the place. We never told anyone. I think we were too proud to say we ran away. All I know is that I'm never going camping again. So, I'm a 26-year-old male, and I've been planning on a camping trip with my wife and dad a whole year. I wanted everything to be perfect, as we don't get away from town and dive deep into the woods as much as I'd like to. This takes place in the very dense Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas. Earlier that day, my dad decided to go a little early and pick up a good spot for us to camp. To give a layout of where we camped, there are 2 dirt roads on either side of us and an overlook to the north of us. We camped in the middle between the 2 roads. My wife and I arrived, and my dad met down there around 11 a.m. We set up camp and proceeded to enjoy the day until around dinner time. When we started to cook our meal for the evening, right as we got done with dinner, we see this truck circling around our campsite. He went around several times and finally pulled right up into our camp and got out of his truck. He then proceeded to tell us that this is my family's campsite, and how the firewood that was laying around was his. Now, in this particular forest, campsites are first come, first served, and my dad had been there since 9 a.m. He then asked, "Can I camp next to you guys?" And of course, being friendly, we said yes. We didn't know that when he said next to us, he meant directly on top of us. He packed his camper in so close to our tents and vehicles that he blocked my truck in. We weren't sure why he was doing this, being that there were so many other campsites available, but we just shrugged it off and tried to have a good time anyway. Not long after that, we noticed a white Dodge dually circling around us. We had an awful feeling from this truck because it went around several times, but we dismissed it because the area we were at was popular due to overlook. After a long night of drinking and goofing off, we decided to go to bed. I was in a dead sleep when, out of the woods, I wake up to a blood-curdling scream. I jolt up and ask my wife, "What the hell was that?" About 30 seconds later, we hear another scream in the distance. At this point, I grab my gun and unzip the tent so we could see out. My dad had left a lantern burning. so we could see a little ways into our campsite. At that moment, we see a white Dodge dually tearing down the road behind us. They continued down the road until they were out of sight. We heard them stop and get out of their truck, slamming the door and screaming. Then they proceeded to get back in their truck and drive away very slowly down the other road that was in front of our campsite. At this point, we were so terrified, thinking that they were coming to rob us, but they kept driving until they were out of sight. Then we heard them shooting. After the gunshots ended, they sped off. At this point, we thought that maybe they were just drunk and acting stupid, so we decided to call the cops. But we didn't have any signal. We just tried to get back to sleep. The next day, we had to make a beer run for my dad. When we made it out of the camping area and hit the main highway, there were police everywhere. They had stopped 2 young boys. We assumed they were the ones who were being troublemakers the night before and continued on our way into town. When we got back to our campsite, the cops were leaving after talking to my dad. They told my dad that the guys in the white dually had gone into the young guys' camp while they were hunting and were robbing them. The boys walked up on their camp being robbed, and the dually guys pulled guns on the young boys, proceeded to rob the young boys at gunpoint. We think if it hadn't been for the people that camped right on top of us, as strange as it is, they would have robbed us instead. They made our campsite look bigger than it actually was. The people in the white dually were never caught. When I was 19, I was a venture scout, sort of like Boy Scouts, only for older kids, and it's gender mixed. I decided to go to this week-long mixed scouting camping trip with a friend of mine, but a few days before going, my friends from Venture Scouts bailed, so I'd be going into the mountains alone with a bunch of strangers, which was no big deal for me. I can handle myself. When I got there, I was the only Venture Scout, and the only girl. It was a little awkward, but most of the Boy Scouts were pretty nice and easy to get along with. Although they weren't used to camping with a girl, they happily accepted me as just one of the guys. But there was this one guy, Danny, from the first day of camp. He wouldn't take his eyes off of me. He just stared at me. It was a little uncomfortable, yeah. But I figured he was just socially inept with girls or something, and tried to pay him no mind. The next day, while we were hiking, we all split off into pairs, and it turned out I was paired with Danny. He looked a little too excited about the idea of hiking with me alone. His eyes always seemed a little too wide, a bit crazed looking, but he was a small guy, spindly, unkempt hair, and a little shorter than I was at 5'7". I figured I'd be able to take him on in a fight if I needed to, if he tried anything, so I didn't raise a fuss about it. Before setting out to hike, he kept asking me if I needed help putting on my sunscreen. Even though I kept declining, he kept pushing the question and trying to put the sunscreen on me until one of the guys told him to cut it out. While we were hiking together, he kept probing me. "How old are you?" he'd ask. 19, almost 20, I'd reply. "Oh, don't lie. You must be 14 or something. You're so innocent. Young, innocent girls are always the cutest." He kept asking innocent enough questions like where I lived, if I had siblings, what my favorite color was, but then he'd started asking me if I ever heard of BDSM. I was taken aback by this and was more than a little uncomfortable, so I pretended not to know what he was talking about, all while trying to give as many cues as possible for him to drop the subject. But then he started going on about what BDSM was. about tying girls up, about hitting them and burning them. At this point, I was freaking out a little bit, but keeping my cool. I didn't want to show him my distress, any chinks in my armor, as I knew he'd probably get off making me squirm. The only thought I could think of was, what the hell? Seriously, what the hell? As I kept my eyes fixed to the path ahead of me. Then he started complimenting my skin. "You don't see a lot of girls with pale skin. Do you use moisturizer?" he had asked, attempting to touch my hand, but I kept my arm close to me, held fast to my backpack. I was incredibly tense, and every muscle in my body was screaming. I sorely regretted wearing a tank top, as I could feel his eyes on me. He started telling me how my pale skin is beautiful, since you can see the rope burns and the bruise is better. The way he said it sent chills down my spine, and the anxious knots forming in my stomach grew tighter. He asked me if I was a virgin. Then he asked me if I fantasized about rape, and if I'd like to try out rape play. Wide-eyed in disbelief, I turned my gaze away from the dirt path and looked at him. He was smiling, a creepy, childish sort of smile that was just chilling. I kept silent and quickened my pace. He felt too close, far too close. I wanted to run. He could probably see the fear in me. At this point, there was no hiding it. Then, I saw that another pair of scouts were ahead of us. I ran to them, telling them that the four of us should group up and go together. At first they declined, saying that we were supposed to be going in groups of two, but upon seeing how panicked and distressed I was, the two guys changed their mind, looking confusedly at Danny, who was silently glaring at me. I was just glad someone else other than Danny was there. The four of us went up to the mountain and tried to keep close to the other two boys and as far from Danny as possible. Upon reaching the end of the trail and regrouping with the others, the two Boy Scouts offered to switch partners to descend the mountain path. Danny looked downright upset, angry even. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him or something, but I didn't care. If it pissed him off or not, I accepted the offer, switching partners, and was able to get back to the camp in relative peace. On the way down, the Boy Scout I was with asked me if Danny was bothering me or something, but I lied and said he wasn't bothering me too much. After all, I was 19. I thought it would be pathetic to get so distressed about some weird 15-year-old kid. I figured that so long as I stuck with the other guys, I'd be fine. But then that night, I was alone in my tent. Everyone else got to sleep in pairs of 2 or 3, but since I was the only girl, I had to be alone in my tent. It's always a little creepy being alone and isolated in the forest, away from everyone else. The scoutmasters insisted my tent be far away from the boys' tents so that they wouldn't bother me. But it only put me in a more vulnerable, isolated position. I sorely wished I'd been closer to the protection of the rest of the group. Late that night, I heard rustling outside. I figured it was just a deer or an elk or something, as it usually was, and went back to sleep. But then I heard my tent opening. Opening my eyes, I peeked through the crack in my sleeping bag to see what it is. And there, I saw the white of an eye looking at me, looking through the opening of my small tent. It was Danny, staring at me. I froze, holding my breath. I held my dad's hunting knife close to me, hiding in my sleeping bag, not moving a muscle, staring Danny down, pretending to be asleep, ready to fight at any moment, should he take one step into my tent. But he didn't do anything. He just stared, watching me, breathing heavily, and muttering incoherently to himself. "Are you there?" I thought I could hear him say. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, he left. The next morning, exhausted, I caught naps when I could, and kept close to the other scouts in my group. It was difficult to maintain my calm and cool composure. The scout leaders were a little frustrated with me, since it seemed like I wasn't paying much attention to their instructions. But at this point, I didn't much care for it. I was always on some level of alert, as Danny would sometimes creep up behind me, caress my neck, or play with and try to smell my hair. And every night Danny was there, watching. One night, he went digging through my backpack, looking for something, but unfortunately for him, I kept all my clothes and personals tucked away with me in my sleeping bag and left with nothing. I grew up in a rough situation and circumstances, so I always felt I can only really rely on myself. Asking for help was never an option as a kid. Asking for help meant you were weak, so it hardly even occurred to me. I was prepared to tough it out the rest of the week, but a little over halfway through the week, Danny was called away by the scoutmasters and sent home. I got the feeling that the Boy Scout that helped me before saw what he was doing and sent in a complaint about him to the staff, as while everyone else was confused and happily saying bye. He just crossed his arms firmly, stared as Danny left. Danny looked so bewildered and confused by all of it, like he didn't understand what he did to deserve being kicked out of camp. It was so strange. I tried my best to forget about it. The rest of the week went on without a hitch, but the more I think back on it, the more I realize how damn freaky and bizarre that kid really was. I fear he may end up being some kind of serial rapist or something when he grows up, but all I know for certain is that he was very disturbed. I'm just glad my dad told me, although knives weren't allowed at this camp, to take this hunting knife with me. My father insisted I keep it for protection, and I did not regret it.